Hello, Dana Prophet. Welcome to 1065 Factors. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sonia. I really appreciate being here.
Great. And you're hailing from South Africa. Isn't that interesting? So can you share how you are an American and you are living in South
Mhm.
Africa, how long you've been there, and what brought you to that continent?
A boy. Why do women move across the world? Because of boys. I am an American. I kind of divide my time between America and South Africa, but right now this is my primary residence. I've been here about 18 years.
Wow.
Doesn't seem like it. I still sound very American,
Yes.
obviously. Yeah, I met my husband on holiday. We were in France and we met each other and we knew within 5 minutes we were going to be married. So that was 18 years ago. And here I am.
Great. And which part of South Africa is this? So, honestly, I do not know the map of South Africa that well, but you can still share just for anyone who, maybe from South Africa come across this video.
Yeah, no, I live in Johannesburg. We also often visit Durban and Cape Town, which is on the coast. They're both beautiful cities.
Mhm.
Johannesburg is a little more inland and it's more of the financial and industrial hub of the country. So it's a city, it's busy, 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 that kind of vibe.
So you are a blogger and also a psychologist, and it sounds as if also
Mm.
you're a life coach. All of the and I'm
Yes.
sure there's so many more titles that and roles that you have. And so share with
And
us.
we all do. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I basically call myself a research psychologist and an empowerment coach. So what that means is I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I don't do diagnostics or things like that, but I love to research. I love to find out why things happen and, find out the factors that influence human behavior. I
Right.
love that. I'm also an empowerment coach because I like to help people, find ways to overcome their challenges. And I seem to find some interesting ways to do that that other people quite don't get. So I like to share that knowledge with people. So what I do is I have master classes and workshops, and I was doing them live in front of groups before COVID hit. And then obviously when COVID hit, everything went into lockdown. So I decided to give that time to myself to finish my PhD. And now that that is done, I've moved to moving everything online. So you're going to see in about probably June or so, 2024, you're going to see all of my master classes and workshops starting to appear online. That way I can reach broader audiences and help more people. So that's what I've been doing lately. I've been in the studio filming and recording and coming up with content and talking to all sorts of people, and it's really been a blast.
Great. And I think I saw where you mentioned that you work with Tony Robbins and some other famous
Hmm.
life coaches. So do you want to share about that?
Yes, no, I worked for the Tony Robbins companies and I worked in his marketing department. And I also worked in Dr. John Demartini's marketing department. Now, Tony Robbins is a bit of a peak performance coach. He knows how to get people motivated. He is larger than life. He's
Right.
manifested his reality, yeah, like on a wow factor. And it was amazing working for him. And then Dr. Demartini is a specialist in human behavior. So they both kind of study people and know how to get people unblocked and motivated. And
Right.
with my natural interest in psychology, it sort of followed along that I sort of grew with these companies and grew with myself in that we were always talking to participants. We were always interviewing them and finding out what they needed.
Right.
And that piqued my interest in psychology as well. So I'm just continuing the course, I guess.
Great. That's wonderful when you can have, find that inspiration and then continuing that inspiration to motivate others. So you said you finished your PhD, and even though it's not research, it's not clinical based, it is research based.
Mhm.
Can you share some of the things,
Yes.
topic or subject of research for yourself?
Yes. Yes. Well, because I am an expat living in a foreign country, and I got to see a lot of the sometimes marginalization, sometimes unhappiness, sometimes failure, expatriate failures. I got to see a lot of the worries of the expatriate community in South Africa and beyond. And I
Mhm.
was really curious about it. And I really wanted to study what drives expatriate adaptation. And so I studied expatriates. And in my thesis for my PhD, I took it upon myself to find out what was the driving force of expatriate adaptation, both in South Africa and around the world. Because,
Right.
you know, what makes humans ticks? What makes us happy or unhappy or whatever? So I studied self-efficacy in combination with emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence. I added a few outside factors, such as host country nationals welcome, their reception, social support, perceived cultural distance. I threw all of these into a big mix to find out what really makes an expat happy or not. And my driving theory was that a person had to be high in self-efficacy. That was the main driving force. And they had to have a good amount of cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence. And that would make somebody, you know, really comfortable in their self and comfortable in their skin in a foreign land. That's not what happened at all.
Oh,
And that's good because in science, you're always trying to prove your null hypothesis. So that's
right,
a good thing. So
right.
we found out that I had about 1,600 expatriates that responded to my surveys.
Right.
About 400 to 500 outside of South Africa, and then the rest in South Africa. And
Mhm.
in both those occasions, what really drove an expatriate's happiness was how the locals treated them.
Oh, that's
Quite
interesting. Yes.
funny. And that, I mean, by far, the results were completely unanimous with both groups, and it was by a wide margin. So that led me to, you know, more can I would say curiosity about human behavior and, you know, our own challenges that we face and how we need to overcome them, which sort of drove me to finding out more content and talking to people about more different topics within the challenge, within overcoming your challenges. Ugh.
That is so
And need a
interesting.
glass
And
of water.
so the data that you obtain there, what are some
Mhm.
of the things that these expats are saying, have said about how locals have treated them? Is it that they welcome them in terms of that reception that you mentioned, or they find that they have to assimilate to local norms and folkways in order to kind of have that self-fulfillment and that, contentment that they.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it depends on a variety of factors. We're talking age of the expatriate, where they come from versus where they go, whether they have lived in other countries before, the kind of culture they're going into, whether it's welcoming or not. Some places are very welcoming to expatriates and they love them and they love showing their country off and their customs and things like that. And other ones are a little bit more reserved and closed off just because of their cultural aspects, not because of a xenophobic attitude or anything like that, just because the people themselves. So you'll find that younger expatriates within the country of South Africa are a little bit unhappy because South Africans tend to view them as rivals for job resources, food resources, and things like that. So they are not as happy as, say, an expatriate retired couple in South America who came with all of their resource and just want to enjoy the local flavors and aren't competing for resources. So it
Okay.
kind of really depends on so many factors. But on the whole, expatriates around the world are welcomed. They are welcomed with open arms, but they've also got to make a point to want to fit in as well.
So I know you mentioned South Africa, so that and you're living there. So let's focus on that. So
Mhm.
is it South Africans or the South Africans in terms of the native people that live there that would say that they're in competition for the like jobs or even space, white South Africans versus Black South Africans?
No, unfortunately, it would be for the job pool. So if a young somebody comes from Zimbabwe, it depends on the job pool that they're in. We have a lot of industrial, manufacturing, domestic types of jobs that are available, local vending jobs that are available, and those tend to get taken up by people from all over
Oh, I
Africa. They
see.
come to South Africa to make these little job and businesses for themselves. And they actually, usually when expatriates come from different countries in Africa, they create about 2 jobs for the South African citizens.
Yeah.
Yet, because of the history and the complexity of apartheid and being oppressed under somebody else's rule, South
Yeah.
Africans don't like to be told what they're going to do or who's going to teach them how to do it. I
Yeah.
understand. I feel the same way. So there
Mhm.
is a lot of competition in the job market from indigenous South Africans to regular anybody else who comes in, actually.
Okay, great. Your PhD, you said you completed it while living there. Did you attend a university in South Africa, or it was one of those universities started here in the US and then continue online? How did that work?
Nope, I did it here in the good old South Africa.
Oh,
There is a
wow.
very large university here called the University of South Africa. And while giving I don't know what the percentages, but a very large percentage is online activity, but they have huge buildings and classrooms and teachers
Yeah.
and all of that. So they kind of do both, but I think their concentration, especially for the diaspora, is online. So I've done all my postgraduate work, my master's, my honors, my PhD through them. And they've got an impressive alumni. Nelson Mandela went there for a little while. Archbishop Desmond Tutu went there for a little
Yeah.
while. So I
Wow.
consider myself rubbing with the shoulders of the giants in that
Yeah.
respect.
Wonderful. So
Yeah.
you are really immerse yourself into the culture, it seems. You attend is there a
Hmm.
local language or dialect that you picked up that you feel fluent in, even though you've
Oh, honey.
and it's still very
That would be a big no. I can speak a few words in an Indabelli language, which is Zimbabwean, because my husband was brought up there.
okay.
But it's usually like, like my husband will say, Faga some salt on the food, which means put. Faga means put, or things like that. But not fluent in anything, and certainly not fluent. But and that's one of my super powers. If I could have a superpower, it would be to be fluent in every single language,
Right.
because I'm so not. But I found out that a smile goes a long way.
Great, great. Thank you. So your blogs are very interesting because as you said, you are kind of now creating this platform where everything is going to be online and for your
Mm.
master classes. So the master classes,
Mhm.
what type of people do show up at your master classes that you've had so far?
Usually people looking for some sort of answers. I have got 3 master classes that I put out there. And upcoming is going to be a free mini masterclass on goal setting, which is lots of
Oh,
fun.
great. Yeah.
But that was sort of part of one of my other classes. So one of my master classes is called 8 Steps to Create the Life You'll Love. And
Mhm.
so that is for people who feel stuck in their lives and they don't know what the next steps are. I focus heavily on creative visualization, meditation to get answers, goal setting, finding out your superpowers. But one of the things I really like to address in my long courses is something called active imagination. And
Active.
that is a term coined by Carl Jung, who was a psychiatrist in the early 20th century. He was a student of Freud's, but sort of walked away when Freud got a little freaky. Um, so he started his own thing, but he coined terminologies that we use today, like the collective unconscious and archetypes and all of these things. And
Mhm.
he did a process where you sort of go in and you personify subpersonalities in your system. So some of these archetypes are called your shadow,
Mhm.
or your mother figure, or this. Well,
Mhm.
what we do is we take a challenge and call it your inner bully,
Okay.
or call it an autoimmune disease. I suffer from several of those. So we use that a lot as well. And we personify it and we visualize it and we take it through a whole series of questions and actually go into meditations and talk to it. And it talks back to us. And we learn how to make a friend instead of a foe. So that's where my serving purpose really lies, is getting inside people's heads to help them make friends with themselves, to reconcile this inner turmoil. So I have a little bit of that in my master classes. I had already mentioned the 8 steps to create the life you'll love. I also do one on the divine feminine, which talks about femininity from the beginning of time to our contemporary cultural standards. And there's one called emotions and illness, which is like the link between those two and how it affects your approach to chronic illness. And we use a little bit of that active imagination in there.
Right. So interestingly, I'm wondering, and you can correct me you being the psychologist, is this where, in terms of Carl Jung thesis or theory, where we believe that there's a male or female version in both genders? Is this his argument?
Yes.
One of his arguments?
Yes.
And that
One is called yes.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say one is called an animus and one is called an anima. So
Right.
those are, go ahead.
Yeah, and so describe that the both in terms of the animus and the anima. Go ahead.
Well, it's based on Eastern philosophy, basically the yin and the yang symbol. So if you know that little white half circle and the little black half
Right.
circle, one of those has a dot of the other inside. And it shows the complementary forces of what you would term duality or opposites. So female and male. And they noticed throughout sessions with their patients and things like that, that we all have what would be deemed opposite gender traits. And they come out in certain times and they come out in certain, instances, work, family, social situations, all of that kind of stuff. But they are saying that in order to be whole, you have to recognize and cultivate both sides of yourself. So males have an anima, which is their female side, and women have an animus, which is their male side. So you and I would have an animus, which is male, which is represented by the logos principles. So it's skills and reasoning and all of those things that come out in us when we're not being nurturers and caregivers. And then men have an anima, which turns them into whiny little babies, actually. I'm just kidding. But it can if they're anima possessed. But it gives them a level of depth and emotional connection and things like that. So, if you want to say that we're sort of driven by fundamental male and female characteristics, there's still a little bit of the other one within each of us.
Right. And so for males who probably wonder, why do I cry so much? And because it's not the male trait, now they can understand why, because they have a little of in
That's
them.
exactly it. And thank God they do, because if they didn't, can you imagine? Oh my goodness. I mean, I love men, and I talk about this in my talk, The Divine Feminine. I love them, but thank God they have a little female in them, but they can't get what they call possessed by it. So you can get possessed by your anima or your animus. It can take over your personality. And so like, if you think of the men who I jokingly said earlier, sorry, they get whiny and needy and clingy. That is their anima coming out full force. Women turn into real ball busters. They turn into man haters and corporate sharks and this and that kind of thing. So we need a balance of each one. And it really brings a wholeness and a totality to our persona.
Very interesting. So this leads me to the question. You did a blog on why are women becoming more you can correct me, tell me the actual title, but basically you're saying women are behaving more masculine than before. But with this argument by Jung, then could you understand why? Is it that? But I know you said find a balance, but there's a saying that biologically, not just a saying, there's a scientific research that has been done that says biologically, as we move forward into the different era of our lives, our times, that you will find more women taking on more masculine trait and more men taking on feminine trait. Are we at this point then? And then kind of realizing the archetypes that Jung talk about?
Well, I think it depends both on a societal level and on a individual level.
Mhm.
So the way society is gone, since we don't have to be hunters and gatherers and things like that anymore, women have sort of pressed for equal rights.
Right.
In order to be heard by men, though, who weren't used to having women shout at the top of their lungs,
Mhm.
we had to sort of, take on very masculine traits to do it, as I say in that article.
Right.
We burned our bras in the 70s and we wore pants and we did this.
Right.
We did it by trying to emulate man, excuse me, rather than doing it through womanly traits. And it has become almost essential to have more masculine traits in our working culture. Now that women and men are working the same as each other, it's
Right.
become sort of a societal thing rather than an individual thing. And what I am trying to say is basically hang on to your femininity. And it doesn't have to be physical femininity. It can be your nurturing, your,
Skills.
creating
Yeah.
advocacy, that kind of stuff. But on a societal level, we have been pushed to be more masculine. And
Mhm.
I think we embraced it for a
Mhm.
while because we hadn't had a chance to use our little masculine, strong powers and stuff. We liked it. But
Right.
now we're getting out of balance again. Now we're
Yeah.
getting out of balance and losing touch with our femininity. On an individual life stage level, as you mentioned, I do think it happens, especially in an elderly generation. I
Mhm.
think the men have been breadwinners and taking care of their family so long, and
Mhm.
they tend to physically and biologically decline faster than women. So women sort of rise up, and at the same time, they're being more nurturing of their spouse or partner or family members. They're being stronger as well. So we do sort of get more masculine as we get older in that life stage, as we're getting masculine as we're getting in our societal stage. So
Mhm.
it's a very interesting concept. And it's only in the last maybe 70 years that we've started doing this.
Yeah.
We were women and very girly and quite oppressed for
Right.
thousands and tens of thousands of years. And now we're just doing it now, which also brings in another question. Now we're becoming more gender fluid. And so were we generally gender polarized for years, then
Right.
got a little bit of equal rights, and now we combining into a genderless society? It's very
Um,
interesting. And I know that you were talking about that movement,
the
the
4B.
4 movement, yes, in Korea, where not only are they sort of denying the masculinity in their government and social expectations, but they're almost becoming genderless themselves. A lot of their participants are, becoming very unfeminine in relation to, not marrying, not having kids, but also in their physical appearance, shaving their heads and being
Right.
very militant things. So it's very interesting to see what's going to happen to gender in the next 100 years.
That, yeah, I'm very curious on your take with that because if one of the quotes I got from you said women are aggressively fighting their way through life, throwing away the essence
Mhm.
of femininity. Isn't this an example of what that 4B movement or the Four No's movement in Korea? I mean, I can't
Is.
imagine it's this radical approach really become a mainstay where it is actually going to have constantly be alive and people actually do. I think it's going to fail. I hate to say that, but it just doesn't seem viable or sustainable for people to live this
It,
way, this kind of genderless type of no man society, and we women are just going to be, you know, live
Yeah,
life.
I completely agree. Well, for the future of humanity, yes, it's unsustainable. Obviously. Well, maybe not actually with all the medical advances we have nowadays. But both the feminist movement of the 70s and this movement were in direct response to misogynistic societal and
Yeah.
government imposed sanctions in a way. So, and everybody forgets how radical the 70s feminist movement in the United States really, really was. So, while we say this 4B movement in South Korea is radical as well and unsustainable, they kind of said the same thing in the 70s with women. So, who really knows? I personally, it's still a fringe movement. And I think we worked hard to make strides in women's equality, but we, even though we started in the 70s, are so far away from anything yet. So that movement if it's very radical, it'll burn itself out like a flame. Like if anything's too hot and too strong, it will burn
Yeah.
itself out. But if it starts to get traction or a little bit of acceptance in mainstream society, it could last a little bit longer.
It could
It'll be
last. Okay.
interesting to see.
So
Yeah.
what you mentioned, you stated something about the collective unconscious or the collective conscious.
Hmm. Yes.
Then if this awareness or maybe lack of awareness
Hmm.
about how we're behaving, then how our behaviors are
Hmm.
shaped, say in terms of our gender and
Hmm.
the biological makeup of our being, then what is it, this idea of behaving male or behaving female, it's not just biological in that sense, it's also social, because it is all these pieces of ideas that collectively have created this thing and objectively just, out there in our society and say, this is the way we should behave. So then why
Hmm.
then women decided to shift into this men role, not just taking over the role, but taking over in terms of their physicality, if that makes sense.
Hmm. I think what you're trying to ask is, why did we do it? Why are we becoming more masculine?
Yes.
And I think it's in direct response to oppression. Women have been targeted for oppression and still are in many countries and many religions.
Mhm.
I do talk a little bit about this in my masterclass about a tie between religion and oppression of women. Because
Okay.
if you think about it, the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they all, in their fundamental genres, oppress their women and
Mhm.
cover them up and make their women subservient. I mean, even the story of Adam and Eve, she was created from his rib.
Mhm.
It always goes back to that darn apple, I say. But anyway, women finally had enough. And we finally had enough because society didn't need the men like they did before.
Mhm.
Technology caught up with us. We started needing more income for the family. We started needing a lot of different resources. And
Mhm.
so women sprung up and said, we are ready for this. We're not going to be beat down by you anymore, but we had to do it in a way that we were heard. And that's why it had to become radical. I have a friend who works in a very patriarchal uh, work environment. And
Mhm.
she said, I had to become a man in order to be heard in this environment.
Wow.
And it's very interesting. She goes,
Yeah.
nobody listened. Nobody took me seriously. Nobody did this until I became this. So we are still living in a misogynic society, and we still have to kind of shout and be a little radical sometimes. Although I am trying to propose that we still do it while not losing our femininity, because I really believe that we need balance and harmony within ourselves, within our friendships, and within our family.
Agree. So sometimes the shift is just so out of, it just sometimes seems so uncomfortable when you said you have to grow balls to be in the room with the, it just becomes too much. And
Yeah.
then it makes women seems more fearful, more aggressive, more just disconnected from the feminine aspect of, okay, yes, you're a woman, and then you should be fight, I hope you, fight for us, but not in that kind of language, not in that kind of way. But it doesn't
Yes,
seem as if it's possible, as you're saying. It seems as if you really
I
have
know,
to
but you know what?
take on the
No,
persona.
it is possible, Sonia. We've come so far. I mean, think about my mother in the 60s and 70s. Couldn't open a bank account without a husband, could not go
Oh,
to the doctor without the husband's consent. And you
mhm.
know what? Yeah, it's taken 70 years, but we've been living since prehistoric times, thousands and thousands of years.
Right,
Even Adam and Eve, if you think of creation that way, thousands of years ago. So
right,
we have very far in a short amount of time, but we still have far to go, as you
right.
know. And I don't know what that's about. I don't know if our genders are going to become more fluid, if that will sort of make men more sensitive and make women not have to be as militant and masculine in their way, if we sort of even out a little bit, and
Right.
if that's going to be be a biological response or if that's going to be a societal response. We don't know yet. We don't know, because I have another blog talking about rewiring our brains for the future. And it seems like, honey, even your generation compared to my generation when it comes to
Right.
technology and stuff like that. I ain't a boomer, but Gen X, we still are completely different animals, let me tell you. And
Yeah.
so, what is going to happen to the next generations after Gen Z and what Gen A now is, Gen Alpha and all of these things? What's
Right.
going to happen? We really don't know. Is it a bit of Darwinism, how we evolve, or is it society and what we need out of the world? We adapt based on needs and resources and resource allocatment and things like that. So what are we really going to need, and how will that change in the future? Fascinating stuff.
You mentioned the Gen Z though, and I think the segue into this freedom of expression. I think you wrote about where
Yeah.
freedom of to express discontent versus maybe expressing something that is more viable, more nourishing, more knowledge versus everybody
Yeah.
just open to saying anything they want without any kind of research based or fact content there. But the Gen Z is driving that, though. They're the driving force behind this, especially with the technology. So what do you think about that? In terms of, one way you're saying, one way a writer saying there's a decline in freedom of speech, but here you're saying if anything, there's more open expression, but the expressions are more at the level of discontent, stirring up problems, stirring up strife, and causing all this confusion. What do you think?
I think people are spewing. They are, like that writer said, there might be less freedom of speech. And that's certainly
Right.
true in certain cultures and in certain situations. But with the advent of all the technology today, and with the advent of the anonymity that comes with that, and
Right.
the false news and the deep fakes and the AI, I mean, we are in a little hornet's nest right now. What I was trying to say with that article was basically that we need more empathetic communication, but that also stems from a lack of family values that we've seen, ever since the boomer generation, the Gen X, well, some of the boomers started it, working, two parents working because we needed to, we had the expenses, we have household
Right.
expenses, we need cars to get to the job, we needed this. We've lost a sense of family values, and we've lost a sense of humanity in that. And we've gained a sense of independence, which is great, but that also brings a bit of narcissism with it. We only care about ourselves now. We're not going into the extended network of our family and our social ties to learn to live and to learn
Right.
to live with each other in humanity. And I think what we need to do in that respect is start teaching, empathetic communication, emotional intelligence. Going back to my thesis, emotional intelligence scored the worst out of all the things that I was studying. And that was both with expatriates in South Africa and outside of South Africa. So it seems that emotional intelligence, or EQ, as we call it, is something that's sadly lacking. And I don't know if that's because we are, turning our awareness inward versus outward, or what, but I think we need to be more aware of others. We need to be more curious about the world, research more before we speak and before we make statements. And that would probably help a lot, instead of all this bullying and calling people names and spewing, which is basically what I was talking about in that blog post.
The lack of emotional intelligence that you're mentioned, it is the way that it is expressed in terms of, and should I say there's this lack of awareness about it, I should say. In the way that it's on social media, it's as if no one is recognizing, no one is recognizing how even vulnerable it makes the person who is saying things seems or appear. But then the question comes with where, while emotional intelligence is decreasing, there's a lot more people that have increased mental illness or mental problem, or so they say that they have. So is there a connection there where people, even though this open arena to have to engage, to say what you want, freedom to express what you want. At the same time, people are saying, well, I'm saying this, but I also have this kind of mental illness. So not having the emotional intelligence to recognize that you cannot simply say things to hurt others. I don't know if you're seeing the connection there.
I think there is a direct connotation between people talking anonymously without accountability
Okay.
and people not knowing how to process information that's
Mhm.
coming at them. You know, it's not nice to be called names, or it's not nice to, you know, see something that influences you and then in return you feel bad. So I think we need a sense of empowerment,
Mhm.
education, both in communication and empathy and emotions. And we need to just get along better. I mean, it comes down to,
Yeah.
you know, it honestly just comes down to that. Get along better and stop being so busy that we can actually reach out and connect and realize that we are all connected on a much deeper level than we realize, you know, and then people who do have mental illness can be helped. People, it can be recognized, it can be fixed. People who are spewing hatred can be held accountable, can be said, you know, that's not right. Don't do that. And
Mhm.
young girls who are being influenced by social media can have the power within themselves to say, okay, I might not be represented by this, but I still have these gifts, such and such and such. Those
Mhm.
are how we need to change.
Do you see, in terms of the cultural differences that you've experienced living in the US, living in South Africa, is there a
Mhm.
sense of, can you recognize a difference in terms of emotional intelligence among the culture that you're living in and say the US culture? And it could be generational wise or just in general, where you see people are
Mhm.
more conscious of themselves and they take more time to be attentive to others. Do you see that in South Africa where it's, could you describe it as a more collective society or individualist society where everybody's, that type of thing? Can you distinctively see the differences?
Yeah, actually, with the levels of emotional intelligence, it is not that different. However, South Africa is a more collective society.
Okay.
Although the younger generations are much more individualistic because the Western cultures have really come in full force. You know, they get their social media, they get their movies from the States, their music,
Right.
the television shows. Although there is a resurgence of South African arts and cultures, they're
Mhm.
still coming up on a very individualistic level. So I think the level of emotional intelligence
Mhm.
in both is the same, but it's very culturally based. I mean, some cultures find that, excuse me, smiling is very friendly. Others seem it as aggressive. You know, so it also depends on your culture, not just kind of who you are or at the level of age you are or country culture. It's very much individually and societal based. So
Mhm.
it depends on what culture you're coming into and what culture you're leaving from that will make it apparent. That's what I found in my study, how I studied emotional intelligence.
Okay, fair enough. You said that
Mhm.
we are so powerful, we can create physical changes in our body, which would link, and I think you hinted at it about our emotions and mental illness. And the
Mhm.
way that we think, our cognitive abilities, the way we think
Mhm.
about things
Yeah.
can make us sick or can even make us better.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I throw in, I said, well, I know it appears you're writing more from an optimistic point of view, where
Yeah.
this is the way you should do it. This is the way you should go. And then, of
Mhm.
course, you're going to probably have people in your audience that will say, well, what about this factor? What about that factor? That
Mhm.
even if I want to think positively to get out of my own mental illness, depression,
Mhm.
anxiety, and so on, racism is preventing me because I have experienced it all day. Sexism is preventing
Mhm.
this because it's so even if I willed myself to think
Mhm.
positively in and just going in the right direction in a way, I'm
Mhm.
going to become sick because of the environment that I'm in, not just
Mhm.
the biological hazards or whatever it is that may be out there, the
Mhm.
chemical, but also just from human beings just being
Yes.
mean and evil and just vile in their ways.
And butt heads. Yes, exactly. I think what is a misperception about that article. And I've seen it from some people, is that I say that you can make yourself well by thinking it. And I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying you can deal with things better
Mhm.
with your positive perception or a positive reaction to things. So whether that's building, you know, like an emotional barrier so things don't hurt you as much and they roll off your back, or by the active imagination techniques I use, by going in and learning about your subpersonalities that may be causing you inner turmoil and making a friend or a partner with those, or by you know, listening to great music and watching funny puppy videos, anything you need to do to change your perception and your reaction, because your reality won't change. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
Maybe I must have, I probably need to work on communicating better. I
Yes.
know the reality is not going to change. You are not going to smile and all your problems are going to go away. All you can change is your reaction and your perception of it. So that's what I try to do. That's what I try to tell people, because we can. And as my example in the blog that you
Yeah.
that read, you know, you can get yourself worked up, or if you think about a sad situation, you can make yourself cry. Women do it all the time. We find it fun for some reason. I don't know why, but we do. It's catharsis. It's an emotional catharsis. But or we can get worked up over fear.
Yeah.
And we experience that. Our bodies don't really recognize when something is real or imagined. You know, the same areas in the brains are activated, and we do have a physiological response. But I'm not saying we can heal ourselves, or I'm not saying that we can take away the realities in the world. We just have to change our perceptions and reactions to it. Emotional intelligence helps with that very much. So
I think
again, that's where I think we need to really, gosh, even, you know, teach it in schools. You know, teach a life course in, you know, compassion and empathy and emotional intelligence, and don't make it a one semester course. It should be taught through the different levels of life.
Great. Wow. You should be teaching in the
Yeah.
university. You're teaching. However, I'm talking at the universities, because this is on all of this stuff that you talk about, not being the victims of our circumstance, but being the masters of our reality. So yeah, so
Mhm.
the thing is, some people say, okay, you're a psychologist, and your job and your training, it requires you to look at the individual, tell the individual that whatever it is, whatever power within them, they
Mhm.
master it to fix and, work on things in their life, eliminate things that are not working, and kind of find
Mhm.
tools that can work. But then
Mhm.
another person from a different perspective, say a sociologist, um, will look at it and
Mhm.
say, well, we should be fixing the system that is causing all these burdens on people. But I
Mhm.
still want to more agree with you in saying that if we should wait until all these systems change for us to live
Oh.
and be happy and find that peace and that love, it may not happen, because as you said, look how many years it took for women to actually find our rights, and even struggling to maintain it to the point where we have to shift
Mhm.
our behaviors and mannerism to fit into this patriarchal type of society. So
Mhm.
what would you say to that person that is saying, fix the system and stop forcing us to always having to adjust to fit into a system that making it so hard for us?
It's not just one thing affecting our lives. We are part of systems. We are part of, you know, family systems and work systems and
Yeah.
governmental systems and this and that. So I give credence to that. But like you said, if we wait for all of those systems to change, how does change happen? It starts with a person. Individual change is the first thing, and then two people, and then three people, and then 100 people, and then 1,000 people. So it has to start individually. I'm not saying it's one or the other, obviously, but I do know that by changing an individual, your own perception and your own reactions, you can deal with it better. And when you deal with things better, like your symptomology or your unhappiness with the world, people around you notice, and then it's sort of contagious. It tends to change things.
Yeah.
So start with yourself. Make a small change in your little pool of, influence, whether it just be you and your cat or, a whole pile of people. And then other people who believe in the sociological aspect of it and prefer that system, they can work on that. We can all work together in different ways because it's not just one thing that affects us as humans.
It's a lot and many, many. So you mentioned fear a while ago, FEAR. Is the on one side you're saying put yourself out there, okay? Even if you're shaking in fear. And then the other person
Mhm.
is giving advice and says, well, fear keeps us safe. But is it safe
Mm.
in quotation where safety may seems as if you're dormant, you're passive, you're not moving, you're not really capitalizing on your skills in order to live a contented life. So can you explain that, putting yourself out there even when you're shaking in fear? How do we do that?
I know, right? Ooh, how do we get over this dissonance of
Right.
what
Yeah,
is happening
exactly.
here? It is hard. It's hard. And especially with such high rates of anxiety and depression and social fears and uncomfortableness, it's very difficult. And strangely enough, I get that. You wouldn't get that from talking to me now. I actually had to make myself a bit of an extrovert because I used to be extraordinarily introverted. And that's how I kind of know what I'm talking about. First of all, you have to, in order to do something, shaking in fear, you have to examine your fear. Who's it? FDR. Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. What are you afraid of? If you pick up the phone and call somebody you're afraid, are you going to die? Are you going to literally have a heart attack and die? You could, but probably not. So what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of looking like a fool? We're all going to do it. We're all going to look like fools at some times in our lives. I probably looked like a fool halfway through this conversation. You got to get over it. You know what I mean? And another thing is to find out how much you will value the outcome of going outside your box. If it's something that is truly, truly important to you, you're
Yeah.
going to have to do it. And a lot of that times is, if staying stagnant is more painful than moving forward, then you're going to move forward,
Mhm.
shaking in fear or not. Support, lots of people around you supporting you, wanting the best for you. That helps, getting you out of the box.
Mm.
Public shame works very well. There was times where I wanted to do things that I was too afraid to do, and I didn't make the step forward. And then I told everybody I was going to do it, and they all waited on me to do it. So I had to do it. So public shame, uncovering your fear, valuing the outcome more than valuing staying still. Those are all kind of ways that you can sort of get out of the box and do things, even when you're absolutely terrified to do it.
Okay, great. And so you may come across, what are some of the things that anybody, even say people in your master class may share and say, I'm fearful of doing this. I'm fearful of, taking a new job. I'm fearful of getting married. I'm fearful of,
Yes.
even building my own emotional intelligence because they're afraid to find out who they are. What are
Mm-hmm.
some of the other things that people are fearful of?
Of becoming their true authentic self, whether they've been hiding sexuality, whether
Mhm.
they've been hiding a vocation that they've always wanted to do but can't do it. People are afraid ultimately of rejection. People are afraid of facing themselves. People are afraid of being made fun of by others. And that's again where we get to the freedom of speech and teaching people to be kind and empathetic
Right.
and emotionally intelligent, because we ridicule too easily others. And what we have to do is empower people, so even if you have those people
Yeah.
ridiculing, you still have the power to keep going forward. So those are the kind of things. And like you said, starting a new job, quitting your job and starting a business, moving to a different country, those are all sorts of things that people are afraid to do. And weirdly enough, when I started traveling around the world, I had a physical reaction. I'd never done it before, and my back went out of place so I could barely walk. And I thought, how funny. I'm getting on a plane to have an adventure of a lifetime, and my body's telling me that I can't move. How funny is that? So I was very fearful of doing that. But you know what? I walked into a chemist in another foreign country in a language I didn't understand and found a heating pad and sorted myself out and just kept going. So
Wow.
there are so many things that we all do, and even little things like I'm afraid to pick up the phone to call somebody, or when my introvertness comes out is when my husband's talking on the phone to somebody and then he just goes and hands me the phone and I'm like,
No.
what drives me insane? But I force myself to do it. And I
Mhm.
force myself because then I've created a connection and a bond with somebody. That is ultimately one of the most important reasons we're here, is to bond, to me, with other humans and experience relationships and, build our life with that sort of richness.
So I'm gonna task you on that one, because I've come across a lot of people who, in terms of the concept of bonding, where
Yeah.
let's look, I know you said you do coaches for the work environment, where probably you help workers and leaders and so on in
Mhm.
order to make better productive environment. So you're in a work environment, and there are
Mm.
people who have different personality. You talk about introvert, extrovert. We cannot always
Mhm.
move over. Introvert can always get into extrovert areas because it's going to change. Like, you're changing your DNA in a way, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
However, you have people who are more task oriented versus relationship oriented. So when you talk about bonding, the bonding may look different for someone who is more, okay, I'm here to do this job. Yes, I'm going to smile and say hi to you, but it doesn't mean we have to bond about husband and wife and children and the dog and the kids and the vacation and
Mhm.
surgery and your dental work and the list. And the list.
How'd that colonoscopy go, Bob?
Exactly. And all your recipe and so on. There are some people who simply just want to go to work and come home, and they will
Hmm.
bond with their family. They will bond
Mhm.
with their social convoy. I mean, kids, people that they've grown up with, and they have this nice little niche going on. So their needs
Right.
are not necessarily fulfilled in the work environment in terms of bonding. How does this
Yes.
person navigate an environment that is expecting to have that type of connection where you bond in those several areas that I talk about without losing their job, without feeling as if they're isolating themselves or isolating others?
That's when they're going to have really great communication skills and setting boundaries.
Okay.
We all have different personality types, as you mentioned. We all bond at different levels, and some of us are just way out there and open and
Yes.
kind of I am, and other people are not. And that's fine. We all are who we are, and we shouldn't have to be imposed to feel or to be a certain way. I mean, and then, or you have people who are in the neurodivergent spectrum who don't really feel emotional bonds with people who aren't outside, who aren't, within their family.
Social,
So
yes.
you will different people everywhere, and that's fine. But you know what? As we all do, not just those type of people, we all need to set expectations with empathetic communication, as I said before,
Mhm.
with boundary setting, with active listening, and saying, this is how far I will go. I'm not comfortable talking about this, but I am wonderful talking about this project with you. Why don't
Right.
we talk about this in a great bond? And with you, I can tell you anything. My dog had diarrhea last night. That's fine. So you just have to
Right.
create, and you have to understand. But that's where you also have to understand emotions, because if somebody's giving you body language that is like standoffish and you don't know how to read it, you don't know
Mhm.
how to read that emotion, or you don't know how to read that communication, you're going to be, causing friction all around. So it's all about communication
Uh-huh.
skills, boundary skills, and emotional intelligence skills. I'm really big on those three things.
So you say, for example, you share a lot, and you share about, get to work Monday morning, but you share about your weekend. And the
Mm-hmm.
one coworker is willing to listen. There are
Mm-hmm.
individuals or coworkers or, individuals that expect a matching or pairing of information. Okay, so now
Mm-hmm.
I share, now you share, that type of thing. How would
Yeah, well,
how would you help someone who
it,
will say, "Oh, that sounds great. However, my weekend wasn't that lively as yours," and then move on. But the person feel kind of left out because it didn't get the same feed that they,
yes.
they put out? What do you think?
That's where the expectations are not being communicated properly. So
Mhm.
if a person who doesn't want to share that much is listening, but doesn't want to share, that person needs to put that expectation to be met. So they need to let the person who is sharing know, I'm happy to listen to you, but I'm not going to share. If the
Okay.
person who is sharing with a person who they know is not going to reciprocate, then they're wasting their time. So by having expectations known and between both parties, they're
Mhm.
not going to be disappointed if they know this person is not going to share, but they're still willing to listen. So you give them a little bit.
Mhm.
And if the person is not willing to share, if they don't set that expectation with others, then they are not setting their own personal boundaries, believe it or not. They're
Mhm.
letting others stomp on their personal boundaries and not reciprocating, but the other person doesn't know that they're not setting boundaries. So they don't know that they're not going to get the reciprocation back.
Mhm.
Was
Mhm.
that clear? I don't know
Yes,
if I was exactly
that
clear or
was
not.
clear.
Okay.
So in
Okay. Yeah.
both areas, boundaries need to be set, but the communication must be
Expectations and
set.
boundaries. Yes.
Yeah, the communication must be clear, so each side understand that you can come anytime. My office is open. You can have this conversation, but no, it's not going to match at the same energy, at the same level, at the pace of information, because it's just the way
Mhm.
it is. But then you'll find life coach, coaches and psychologists as yourself will say, well, when people want to bond with you, bond with them. And so you're again, yes, coming out of your
Hmm.
comfort zone or facing that fear. I mean, is there a give and take there?
That's you don't do anything you don't want to do.
Okay.
If you do want to do something, but you have fear over it, then master that fear and get over it. If you don't want to bond with somebody, don't bond with somebody. That to me is forcing somebody to be inauthentic. And I
Ah,
don't agree with that. I mean, I would rather people be who they are, even if it's not an overly chatty person or not an overshare, but be comfortable with who they are and have others around them know who that person is and be comfortable with that as well. No, we mustn't, in my opinion, try to be chummy or friendly with people if we don't want to be. There's a civility that must be attained. I agree with that. Civility and things like that I don't think one needs to be rude or abrupt or things like that in a society, because if we're in a society, there are certain social norms that must be adhered to make a society. Civility is one of them, but don't force yourself to be chummy with somebody if that's not the type of person you are. You just must set those expectations out there so everybody knows that.
how much does culture weigh in on this? Because again, I think you're going to become
Mm.
an expert on that with the knowledge that you're getting. How much does culture? I mean, what can you see? We know that in the US, small talk is like the gateway to everything. You go
Uh-huh.
to the coffee shop and you start talking about the weather, and then it just goes
Mhm.
into something. And that is the US
Yeah.
culture. And you
Yes.
in most areas. And then you will have certain
Mhm.
groups of people who may not necessarily uh, fully assimilate to that aspect of the culture. Will just, okay, I'm here for my coffee. Okay, let's go. Do you see
Mhm.
small talk a big thing in South Africa? Not so much in terms of the expats group who maybe have, inherit that from their native country, but in terms of the locals there, how does a small talk go? Because again, remember you talk about connection was one of the things, connecting with locals.
Oh, they love the small talk. Very much so. So yeah, they're not a reserved society. They're not
Okay.
one of those that you might think like a very European or something like that. They're not like that at all. They're very friendly people. They're very chatty, love to laugh, that kind of thing. So, but it is very culturally based. You can go to France per se and be an outsider, and they're not unfriendly people, but they've gotten the reputation of being very reserved and quiet, which they
Mhm.
are until you get to know them. And then they tend to, I'm talking generally, of course,
Mhm.
and then they will start chatting and things like that. But I do find that it is a cultural thing. And that is one of the reasons that cultures might have a bit of friction, is because
Yeah.
you come in. And with me as an American, I'll never forget, I had one time where we had a little bit of a party at our house, and people were leaving, and this one woman I think she was just taken aback by me. And so we were at the door and I said, I hope I haven't, offended you or anything. She goes, no, you just talk with your hands and you're just so big. I was like, oh, she goes, no, I love it. I love it. She goes, I'm just not used to it. So
Mhm.
it depends on, who you are. She was fine with it, but it kind of just took her back. So there can be friction if you are in a society that doesn't like that, or that might be a little bit too much. But South Africans on the whole, yeah, just the same as us. Chat, chat, chat.
Okay. Does the substance of the conversation matters where maybe it's more goal directed in terms of the conversation, whereas in the US there's no purpose, it's just small talk. It's all, about the weather, about you know, just the trees or something versus more something of substance. Does it make a difference in terms of small talk?
No, small talk is small talk wherever you're going to go. It's about what was on TV last night. Did you hear the local gossip? How
Mhm.
did you sleep? It's all that kind of thing.
Okay.
It is going to be in your social circles that sort of directs the flow of conversation. So, like if you go to an NGO working in a nonprofit, that kind of thing, obviously you're going to have more conversations that are more probably deeper on many different levels. But small talk is going to be small talk no matter where you are, what kind of needs there are, anything like that. It's human nature.
Dana, we're at the very end of our conversation. This is exciting. So, but I'm gonna task you again. So we've talked about so many things. What are some of if you have to do like a word cloud on some of the main themes that comes out of this, what would it be?
Word cloud, femininity,
Okay.
equal rights, empathetic communication, emotional intelligence, victimhood, um, humanity
Yes.
in general,
Okay.
um,
Boundaries.
emotions, yeah, boundaries, emotions, personal power, yeah, that kind of stuff.
Very good. So thank you so much. This is very insightful, and I can imagine how much or rich your master classes are and will be. And I'm looking forward to reading more about your blogs. It's very interesting, and I really do like the energy. So thank you for sharing. This has been really appreciative of you to do this. I am informed, and I'm sure once anyone watches this video, they will be informed as well.
I have had such a pleasure talking with you. You made conversation so easy, Sonia. I really appreciate it. So I can't wait. If you want me to come back, I will be glad to come back anytime. And I hope to see you, and I hope to have been of service to you and the people who are listening. If I could offer any insights that help them, that's my job.
You did, and
Good,
you,
good, good.
you do your job well. Thank you, and see you soon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.